Sarah Chun stood at the massive window of the transport ship and watched the Zephyrian Military Academy grow larger as they approached. The building was huge. It looked like someone had taken a mountain and carved it into the shape of a fortress. Gleaming metal towers stretched up into the purple sky of the planet Zephyros Prime. Ships from dozens of different worlds moved around the Academy like busy insects. "First time seeing the Academy?" asked a voice behind her dot. Sarah turned around. A tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms was looking at her. He had the markings of a senior cadet on his uniform. His species was called Altarian, if Sarah remembered correctly from her briefing files. "Yes," Sarah said. "It's bigger than I expected." The Altarian laughed. It sounded like wind chimes. "Everything here is bigger than humans expect. You are the first of your species to join the exchange program, yes?" "That's right," Sarah replied. "I'm Sarah Chun, representing Earth. I am Cadet Zillaneth. I have been here for 2 cycles already." He looked her up and down with his large black eyes. "You seem very small for a warrior from a death world." Sarah had heard that term many times in the past few months. Death world. That was what the galactic community called Earth, a planet so dangerous that most alien species would die within hours of landing there. The fact that humans had evolved there made them objects of curiosity and mild fear throughout the galaxy. "I'm tougher than I look," Sarah said with a smile. The transport ship docked with a soft thud. Sarah picked up her single bag and followed the other new cadets through the airlock. The Academy's main hall was enormous. The ceiling was so high that Sarah could not see the top of it. Hundreds of cadets from different species walked around, talking in languages that sounded like music, clicking sounds, or electronic beeps. Sarah saw cadets that looked like walking trees, others that moved on tentacles instead of legs, and some that seemed to be made of living crystal. She felt very ordinary compared to all of them. "New cadets, report to Assembly Hall 7, announced a voice over the speakers. The words were translated into dozens of languages at the same time. Sarah followed the crowd through corridors lined with pictures of famous graduates. Most of them looked like they could tear a human in half without trying. She wondered what she was doing here. Assembly Hall 7 was smaller than the main hall, but still huge by human standards. About 50 new cadets sat in rows of seats that could adjust to fit different body shapes. Sarah found a seat near the back and watched. As more aliens filed in, a massive door at the front of the room opened with a loud hiss. 2 figures walked in, and every cadet immediately stood up and saluted. The first was clearly the drill sergeant. He was built like a tank with legs. His species was Catherian, according to Sarah's memory. They evolved on a high-gravity world and were covered in thick, natural armor plating. This one had scars across his face and arms that told stories of many battles. His name tag read Sergeant Vextar. The second instructor was completely different. She looked like an octopus that had decided to walk upright. Her tentacles moved constantly, and Sarah could see that each one ended in a different type of tool or weapon. Her species was Nexarian, masters of combat in any environment. Her name tag said, Combat Specialist Krill. "Sit down," Sergeant Vextar's voice boomed across the room. Every cadet dropped into their seats immediately. "Welcome to the Zephyrian Military Academy," he continued. "You are here because your governments think you are the best warriors your species can produce. Some of you might even survive your time here." A few nervous laughs came from the audience. Sergeant Vextar did not look like he was joking. "Your first major test will be the Crucible of Korath," he announced. "It is a survival course that has been used to train elite soldiers for over 200 years. Many of you have heard stories about it. Most of those stories are true." Combat Specialist Krill moved forward. When she spoke, her voice sounded like water flowing over rocks. The crucible takes place on the moon Korath 7. The environment there will try to kill you in every way possible. The air is toxic. The temperature changes from freezing cold to burning hot. The wildlife considers you food. The terrain will cut you, poison you, or crush you if you make a mistake. Sarah felt her heart beat faster. This sounded serious. The course normally takes 6 to 7 standard days to complete, Sergeant Vextar continued. 40% of fee. Cadets who attempt it do not finish. Those who quit are sent home. Those who die ... He shrugged his massive shoulders. Well, at least they die as warriors. A cadet in the front row raised one of his 6 arms. He was from a species Sarah did not recognize. Sir, what equipment do we get? Basic survival kit. Emergency beacon for life-threatening situations only. Tracker so we can find your body if something goes wrong. The sergeant's smile was not comforting. Everything else, you make or find yourself. The crucible is not a competition, Combat Specialist Krill added. There are no winners, only survivors. You may work together or alone. The choice is yours. The moon does not care about your strategy. Sarah looked around the room. The other cadets were starting to look worried. A few were whispering to each other in their native languages. One cadet near the front was breathing heavily, and his scales were changing color. The course begins in 3 days, Sergeant Vextar announced. Use that time to prepare. Study the briefing materials. Check your equipment. Make peace with whatever gods your species believes in. Dismissed. As the cadets filed out of the room, Sarah heard conversations in dozens of languages. Most of them sounded scared. The human girl, she heard one alien say to another. Does she understand what the crucible is? Deathworlders are supposed to be tough, replied his friend. But Korath 7 killed a hegemony super soldier last year. He was genetically enhanced and had military training since birth. Sarah pretended not to hear them. She had read about the hegemony soldiers in her briefing files. They were bred specifically for war, with enhanced muscles, reinforced bones, and modified organs that could process toxins. If the course could kill one of them, what chance did a regular human have? Over the next 3 days, Sarah studied everything. She could find about Korath 7. The moon was a nightmare world of sharp crystal formations, acid pools, and predators that evolved to hunt in the worst conditions imaginable. The average temperature was either too hot or too cold for most species. The atmosphere would slowly poison anyone who breathed it for too long. She also watched videos of previous attempts at the crucible. Most cadets moved carefully, taking hours to cross terrain that looked simple. They built elaborate shelters and spent days planning each move. The successful ones were methodical, cautious, and very, very slow. On the morning of the test, Sarah stood with 49 other cadets in the transport bay. Everyone was wearing environmental suits and carrying their survival kits. The air was thick with tension and fear. Cadet Zillineth stood next to her. Are you ready, Deathworlder? He asked. Sarah looked around at the other cadets. They were all bigger than her, stronger than her, and had natural advantages she did not have. Some could breathe different atmospheres. Others had armor built into their skin. A few had enhanced senses that could detect danger from far away. As ready as I can be, she said. The transport ship shuddered as it left the academy and headed for Korath 7. Through the windows, Sarah could see the moon growing larger. It looked like a ball of broken glass spinning in space. What she did not tell anyone was that Korath 7 reminded her of the camping trips she used to take with her grandfather in the Australian outback when she was 12 years old. The terrain looked familiar. The survival challenges seemed like problems she had solved before, just on a bigger scale. As the transport approached the drop zone, Sarah felt something she had not expected. She was not scared. She was excited. A drop ship flew through clouds that looked like poison gas. Sarah pressed her face against the small window and watched Korithseddon get closer. The surface looked like someone had taken a normal planet and covered it with broken mirrors and acid. Sharp crystal formations stuck up from the ground like teeth. Rivers of green liquid flowed between them, steaming in the thin atmosphere. "Drop zone in 5 minutes," announced the pilot. His voice sounded nervous even through the radio. Sarah checked her equipment one more time. Basic survival kit with water purification tablets, emergency food for 3 days, a small knife, rope, basic medical supplies, and a fire starter. Her environmental suit would protect her from the worst of the atmosphere for a while, but it was not meant for long-term use. The emergency beacon hung around her neck, like a heavy reminder that she could quit at any time. The other cadets were doing final equipment checks too. Most of them looked sick. A few were praying in languages Sarah did not understand. One cadet from a water world was breathing so fast that his gills were fluttering like butterfly wings. 30 seconds to drop, the pilot called out. The back of the ship opened with a mechanical whine. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of sulfur and something that reminded Sarah of burned metal. Through the opening, she could see the landing zone below. It was a flat area surrounded by crystal spires that looked razor-sharp. "Go, go, go," shouted the crew chief. The cadets jumped out one by one. Sarah watched them fall through the thin air before their emergency parachutes opened. When her turn came, she took a deep breath and stepped into empty space. The fall was quick and rough. Her parachute opened with a snap that made her teeth rattle. She could see the other cadets landing. Around the drop zone, some more gracefully than others. One large cadet from a heavy gravity world hit the ground so hard that he bounced. Sarah landed and immediately started packing her parachute. The ground under her feet was covered with sharp crystal dust that crunched like broken glass. In the distance, she could hear sounds that might have been wind or might have been something alive and hungry. "Attention, cadets," came Sergeant Vextar's voice through their communication devices. "The crucible has begun. Your objective is to reach the extraction point on the far side of the throat of Korith. Distance is approximately 200 kilometers. Through hostile terrain, you have 7 days maximum. Your trackers are now active. Try not to die in the first hour." The communication cut off, leaving the cadets alone on the surface of the nightmare moon. Sarah looked around. Most of the other cadets were standing in small groups, talking quietly and pointing at maps displayed on their wrist computers. They were being careful, methodical, just like the training videos had shown. A few were already setting up camps, planning to wait out the worst of the day's heat before moving. Sarah checked her own map and compass. The extraction point was far away, past terrain that looked impossible to cross. But as she studied the route, she started to see patterns. The crystal formations followed geological lines. The acid rivers flowed in predictable directions. The whole landscape made sense once you understood how it had been formed. She started walking. The first obstacle was a field of crystal spires that stretched for several kilometers. The other cadets were studying it carefully, looking for safe paths between the sharp edges. Sarah watched them for a few minutes, then found a different approach. Instead of going around the spires, she started climbing them. The crystal was hard, but had natural handholds where different layers had formed. It was like rock climbing, but with better grip. She moved quickly from spire to spire, using her rope to swing across gaps that would have taken hours to walk. Around, behind her, she could hear other cadets calling out warnings about dangerous shortcuts. Sarah ignored them. This was not dangerous if you knew what you were doing. It was just efficient. In the monitoring station back at the academy, Combat Specialist Krill stared at her screens in confusion. Check Tracker 7 again, she told her assistant. Tracker 7 is functioning normally, the assistant replied. The human cadet has crossed the crystal field in 47 minutes. That is impossible, said Krill. The record for that section is 4 hours and 23 minutes, set by a Catherian mountain warfare specialist. Perhaps her tracker is malfunctioning, suggested the assistant. Krill pulled up the video feed from Sarah's suit camera. She watched the human climb crystal formations, like they were playground equipment, move across unstable surfaces without hesitation, and navigate terrain that should have been impassable for someone her size. Contact maintenance, Krill said slowly. Have them check all monitoring equipment immediately. On the surface of Korath 7, Sarah had reached the next challenge. The temperature was rising as the moon's harsh sun climbed higher in the sky. Her environmental suit's cooling system was working hard, but it would not last much longer in this heat. She found a shaded area between two large crystal formations and sat down to think. According to her map, there was supposed to be a water source nearby, but the briefing materials had warned that most water on Korath 7 was contaminated with acids or toxins. Sarah walked around until she found a small pool of liquid collecting at the base of one of the crystal formations. It was clear, which was a good sign, but it could still be dangerous. She took out her testing kit and ran a few quick checks. The results showed high acid content and several unknown compounds. The purification tablets in her survival kit would not be enough to make it safe. Most cadets would have kept looking for better water or tried to collect moisture from the air. Sarah looked at the crystal formation above the pool. It was the right type of mineral, probably formed by volcanic activity. She broke off a few pieces and crushed them into powder. Then she mixed the powder with the contaminated water and waited. The crystal dust acted as a natural filter, binding with the acid and toxins. After an hour of settling and filtering through cloth from her spare clothing, she had clean drinking water. It was not the safest method, but it was faster than waiting for condensation and more reliable than hoping to find an uncontaminated source. She filled her water containers and kept moving. The next section was supposed to be the worst part of the day's travel. A valley filled with toxic gas that most cadets would have to go around, adding 12 hours to their journey. The gas was heavier than air, so it settled in low areas like a deadly fog. Sarah studied the valley from a high ridge. The gas moved in patterns, flowing like water. There were currents and eddies, just like in a river. If you understood the flow, you could find paths through it. She tied a piece of cloth to a stick and watched how it moved in the wind. The gas followed the air currents, but it was slower to change direction. By timing her movements with the natural wind patterns, she could cross the valley in the clear spaces between gas clouds. Took her an hour to cross terrain that the training materials said was impassable without special equipment. On the other side, she found 3 cadets who had been trying to find a way around the valley for most of the day. They were exhausted and running low on water. "How did you get here so fast?" asked one of them, a tall alien with green skin and compound eyes. "I came through the valley," Sarah said. The 3 cadets looked at her like she had just claimed to. "Fly. That is suicide," said another. "The gas will dissolve your lungs." "Only if you stay in it too long," Sarah replied. She shared some of her water with them and showed them the safe path through the gas clouds. "Follow the wind patterns. Move when the air clears. It is like dancing with the weather." 2 of the cadets decided to try her method. The third chose to go around the long way, which would take him the rest of the day. In the monitoring station, Sergeant Vexstar was pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "Run the diagnostics again," he ordered. "All systems are working perfectly," replied the technician. A human has completed 18 hours worth of objectives in 6 hours. Her biometrics show normal stress levels. Heart rate is actually lower than when she started. That makes no sense, Vexstar growled. She should be exhausted, dehydrated, possibly dead. Sir, said another technician, she is also helping other cadets. She shared water with 3 others and showed them how to cross the gas valley. Vexstar stopped pacing. She is sharing resources? During a survival test? Yes, sir. And her vital signs suggest she is enjoying herself. As the day wore on, Sarah continued to move through terrain that should have been impossible. She found edible plants that the database listed as toxic, but she seemed to know which parts were safe. She built tools from scrap crystal and metal debris that worked better than some of the equipment in the standard survival kits. She crossed unstable ground that should have collapsed under any weight. By evening, she had covered more distance than most cadets would manage in 2 full days. She built a shelter in a protected area and settled down for the night. Around her, the sounds of Korath 7 echoed through the crystal formations. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the calls of the native predators starting their nightly hunt. Sarah smiled as she listened to the alien sounds. It reminded her of camping in the outback with her grandfather, falling asleep to the calls of... Sarah woke up before dawn on her 2nd day in the Crucible. She had slept well, despite the strange sounds echoing through the crystal formations around her shelter. The howls and clicking noises reminded her of coyotes and insects back home. Different sounds, but the same meaning. Night hunters looking for food. She packed her gear quickly and checked her map. According to the course layout, she was supposed to spend today crossing the Shattered Lands, a maze of broken crystal canyons where most cadets got lost for hours. After that came the acid falls, where toxic water cascaded down cliffs that were supposed to be impossible to climb. Sarah started walking as the first light appeared in the alien sky. The Shattered Lands looked dangerous from the entrance. Narrow passages twisted between walls of sharp crystal that rose high overhead. The ground was covered with loose rubble that could shift and trap someone if they stepped wrong. Most cadets would map out the maze carefully, marking safe paths and checking for dead ends. Sarah looked at the canyon walls for a few minutes, then started climbing straight up. The crystal formations had natural patterns, like the grain in wood or the layers in rock. Once you understood how they were formed, you could predict where the strong points would be. Sarah climbed quickly, using cracks and ledges that most people would not even notice. From the top of the canyon walls, she could see the entire maze spread out below her. There was a clear path through it, obvious once you had the right perspective. Instead of spending hours wandering through narrow passages, she could travel along the canyon tops and climb. Down where she needed to. It took her 40 minutes to cross terrain that was supposed to take half a day. In the monitoring station, Technician Yelenik stared at his screens and made a decision. Sir, I think you should see this. He called to Combat Specialist QR floated over on her tentacles, moving faster than usual. What is it now? The human just crossed the Shattered Lands in under an hour, Yelenik said. But that is not the strange part. What could be stranger than that? Yelenik pulled up the video feed from Sarah's suit camera. Watch how she moves, sir. She is not following any of the approved safety protocols. She is climbing surfaces that our engineers rated as unstable. She is taking shortcuts that should not exist. Krill watched the footage in silence. The human moved across the crystal formations like she had been doing it her whole life. She found handholds in places where there should not be any. She crossed gaps that should have been too wide. She never hesitated, never backtracked, never showed any sign of fear. Run a full system diagnostic, Krill ordered. Check every sensor, every camera, every piece of monitoring equipment. Something is wrong. I already did that 3 times. Yelenik replied, everything is working perfectly. The human is just different. On the surface of Korath 7, Sarah reached the acid falls. The toxic waterfall dropped from a cliff face that was 300 meters high. The water was bright green and steamed when it hit the rocks below. Most cadets would have to find a way around, adding a full day to their journey. Sarah studied the cliff face for a few minutes. The rock behind the waterfall was different from the crystal formations she had been climbing. This was older stone, probably volcanic. It would be more stable, but also more slippery. She found a path that stayed just outside the spray from the falls. The rock was wet, but not soaked with acid. By moving carefully and testing each handhold, she could climb up beside the waterfall instead of going around it. Halfway up the cliff, she heard voices echoing from below. Someone was calling for help. Sarah looked down and saw two cadets trapped on a ledge about 50 meters below her. One was a massive hegemony warrior, genetically enhanced and built like a tank. The other was a Centauri, covered in cybernetic implants that normally made him faster and stronger than any natural being. Both of them looked like they were dying. The hegemony warrior was shivering despite his enhanced metabolism. His dark skin had turned pale, and his breathing was shallow. Hypothermia, Sarah realized. His enhanced body was burning through energy faster than normal, and the cold was getting to him despite his genetic modifications. His Centauri was even worse off. His cybernetic systems were sparking and smoking. The harsh environment was overloading his implants, and his enhanced nervous system was going into shock. Most cadets would have kept climbing. This was a survival test, not a rescue mission. Everyone knew the risks when they started. Sarah started climbing down. "Hey," she called out when she reached their ledge. "You two look like you could use some help." The hegemony warrior looked up at her with confused eyes. "You are the human from the transport ship." "That's right. What are your names?" "Cadet Dexmar," the warrior replied through chattering teeth. "This is Cadet Zixtel." The Centauri tried to speak, but his voice synthesizer was malfunctioning. Electronic squeals and static came out instead of words. Sarah examined both of them quickly. Dexmar needed heat and energy. His enhanced body was consuming resources faster than he could replace them. Zixtel needed his cybernetics stabilized before they fried his nervous system. "Okay, here's what we are going to do," Sarah said. She started unpacking her gear. "Dexmar, you need to eat this." She handed him half of her emergency food supply. "It is high-energy stuff. Your metabolism will burn through it fast, but it will warm you up." She turned to Zixtel and examined his smoking implants. Most of them were overheating because they were working too hard to compensate for the harsh environment. Sarah found the manual override controls and started shutting down non-essential systems. "What are you doing?" Dexmar asked. His speech was getting clearer as the food warmed him up. "Turning off everything that is not keeping him alive," Sarah replied. "His systems are trying to maintain perfect environmental control in an environment that wants to kill him. Sometimes you have to accept being uncomfortable to stay alive." She found a small emergency repair kit in Zixtel's equipment and used it to bypass several damaged circuits. It was not a perfect fix, but it would keep his life support running. Within an hour, both cadets were stable enough to move. Sarah showed them a safer path up the cliff that avoided the worst of the acid spray. She shared more of her water and food, even though it left her with barely enough for herself. "Why are you helping us?" Dexmar asked as they climbed. "This is supposed to be individual survival." "Because you needed help," Sarah replied, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Besides, we are all on the same side here." In Neo monitoring station, Sergeant Vexstar was having what humans would call a nervous breakdown. "Contact Academy Command immediately," he ordered. "Sir, what should I tell them?" Ask the communications officer. Tell them we have a situation. The human cadet has completed 2.5 days' worth of objectives in 18 hours. She has helped 3 other cadets survive when she should be focused on her own survival. And according to her biometric readings, she is having fun. Having fun, sir? Her stress hormones are at recreational levels. Her heart rate is consistent, with light exercise. Her brain activity suggests she is enjoying herself. Vextar's voice rose to a roar. She is treating the most dangerous survival course in the galaxy like a pleasant hiking trip. The communications officer tried to process this information. Should I request backup monitoring equipment? No. Request a full review of our threat assessment protocols for Deathworld species. I think we may have made a serious error in our evaluation of human capabilities. Back on Korath 7, Sarah and her 2 rescued companions reached the top of the acid falls. Both Vexmar and Zixtel were moving under their own power now, though slowly. Where do you go from here? Vexmar asked. Sarah checked her map. The burning flats. Supposed to be a desert where the ground temperature reaches 200 degrees during the day. Most cadets wait until night to cross it. And you? Sarah looked at the sun, still climbing toward its peak. I think I will cross it now. The trick is not to touch the ground. She pointed to a series of metal structures scattered across the flats. They looked like the remains of old mining equipment, probably left over from when this moon had been used for resource extraction. Those metal beams will be hot, but not as hot as the ground. And metal conducts heat predictably. If you move fast and know where to step, you can cross in a few hours instead of waiting all day. Zixtel's voice synthesizer was working again, though it still crackled with static. That sounds extremely dangerous. Everything here is dangerous. Sarah replied. The question is which kind of dangerous you can handle. She said goodbye to the 2 cadets and started across the burning flats. Behind her, Vexmar and Zixtel watched in amazement as she jumped from beam to beam across the superheated desert. She moved like the metal structures were a jungle gym, instead of a death trap. I am beginning to understand, Vexmar said slowly, why the galaxy fears death worlds. She is not even using any special equipment, Zixtel added. Everything she does with basic gear and knowledge. They watched until Sarah disappeared into the heat shimmer on the far side of the flats. Then they settled down to wait for nightfall like sensible people. Sarah reached the edge of the throat of Korath as the alien sun began to set on her second day. She had crossed terrain that was supposed to take a full week in less than 2 days. Her water was running low and her food was almost gone, but she felt good. Better than good, actually. She felt like she was finally doing something that made sense. The throat of Korath stretched out in front of her like the mouth of some giant beast. It was a vertical maze of crystal formations that rose up from the desert floor and disappeared into the clouds above. The extraction point was somewhere at the top, but getting there meant climbing through 300 meters of unstable crystal that could collapse at any moment. Sarah sat down on a flat rock and studied the formation while she ate the last of her emergency food. The crystal maze was not random. Like everything else on this moon, it followed natural patterns. Geological forces had shaped it over millions of years, and those same forces had created weaknesses and strengths that you could read if you knew what to look for. Most cadets spent a full day just planning their route through the throat. They mapped out safe paths, tested crystal stability, and moved one careful step at a time. The training videos showed cadets taking 48 hours or more to reach the top. Sarah finished her meal and stood up. She had been looking at the crystal formation for 12 minutes. That was enough. In the monitoring station, the crowd of officials had grown even larger. Word of the impossible human cadet had spread through the academy, and now senior officers from a dozen different species were crowded around the displays. The room buzzed with conversations in multiple languages. "Attention everyone," announced Admiral Kethral. "The human cadet is approaching the final challenge. I want every sensor focused on her. Record everything." Technician Yelenik pulled up multiple camera angles and sensor readings. "Sir, she has been studying the throat for 12 minutes. Most cadets spend at least 6 hours planning their route." "Maybe she is finally being sensible," suggested General Vorthek, a massive Catherian who had completed the Crucible himself many years ago. "The throat is not forgiving of mistakes." On the main screen, they watched Sarah stand up and walk to the base of the crystal formation. She touched the surface with her hand, testing its texture and temperature. Then she looked up at the maze of passages and ledges that stretched above her. "She is going to start climbing," observed Commander Yilseth, an Exarian tactical expert. "Look at her posture. She has made her decision." Sarah grabbed the first handhold and pulled herself up onto the crystal wall. The surface was rough and provided good grip, but it was also sharp enough to cut through her gloves if she was not careful. She moved slowly at first, testing each hold before putting her full weight on it. The crystal formation was like a three-dimensional puzzle. Some passages led to dead ends. Others were too narrow to pass through safely. Still others looked stable, but were actually held together by crystal formations that could shatter under pressure. Sarah climbed steadily, reading the crystal like a book. She could see where stress fractures were forming, where the crystal was thickest and strongest, where the weight of the formation above created pressure points that might collapse. It was like reading the grain in wood or the flow of water in a river. Natural patterns that made sense once you understood them. "Impossible," whispered Dr. Melther, the Academy's chief geologist. "She is climbing through sections that our surveys marked as extremely unstable. They should collapse under her weight." "Are the surveys wrong?" asked Admiral Kethral. "No, sir. Those sections are unstable, but she is distributing her weight perfectly, avoiding the stress points, and moving through them so quickly that the crystal does not have time to fail." Sarah reached the first major obstacle, a gap between crystal formations that was too wide to jump across. Most cadets used ropes and climbing gear to cross it safely. Sarah looked at the gap for a moment, then started climbing sideways along the crystal wall. She found a section where the crystal had grown in a twisted pattern, creating natural handholds that spiraled around the formation like a staircase. By following this spiral path, she could climb around the gap instead of crossing it directly. It was faster than using ropes and did not require any special equipment. "How did she see that path?" asked General Vorthek. "Our mappers missed it completely. She is reading the crystal formation like a topographical map," replied Dr. Melther. "But that requires understanding geological processes that take years to learn." Sarah continued climbing, finding paths that should not exist and using techniques that made no sense according to standard climbing protocols. She moved through unstable sections by distributing her weight across multiple contact points. She found handholds in places where the crystal looked smooth. She navigated around dead ends without backtracking, as if she could see through solid rock. Halfway through the throat, she encountered another group of cadets who had been climbing for over a day. There were 4 of them, and they looked exhausted. One was injured, favoring his left arm. Another was clearly dehydrated, moving slowly and breathing hard. "Human Cadet," called one of them, a tall alien with silver skin and large eyes. "How did you get here so fast?" "I took a direct route," Sarah replied. She climbed over to their position and examined the injured cadet. His arm was swollen and bruised where he had fallen against a sharp crystal edge. "Here, let me help with that," she said. She used strips of cloth from her own clothing to make a proper sling and splint. It was not perfect, but it would support the arm and prevent further injury. You should save your supplies for yourself, the injured cadet protested. I do not need much, Sarah replied. She shared the last of her water with the group and showed them a more stable path through the next section of the climb. Why are you helping us again? Asked the silver-skinned alien. This is supposed to be individual survival. Sarah looked at him like the question did not make sense. Because that is what you do. When someone needs help, you help them. The monitoring station was in chaos. Officers were arguing in multiple languages. Technicians were running diagnostics on equipment that kept reporting impossible results. And Academy Command was receiving urgent communications from government officials who wanted to know what was happening. Sir, announced Communications Officer Reldock, we are receiving priority messages from the Hegemony High Command, the Centauri Council, and the Altarian Defense Ministry. They want full reports on the human cadet's performance. Admiral Kethrel rubbed his temples with 3 of his 4 hands. Tell them we are still gathering data, and contact the human government. We need to know if this cadet represents typical human capabilities, or if she is some kind of enhanced super soldier. Sir, interrupted Technician Helenik, the human has reached the final ascent. She is approaching the extraction point. Everyone turned to watch the main screen. Sarah had climbed through 90% of the throat of Korath in under 6 hours. The final section was a straight vertical climb up a crystal wall that was perfectly smooth. Most cadets used specialized climbing equipment and took hours to ascend it safely. Sarah looked at the wall for exactly 30 seconds. Then she started climbing. There are no handholds on that surface, said Dr. Melther. It is physically impossible to climb without equipment. But Sarah was climbing anyway. She was using tiny irregularities in the crystal surface, imperfections so small that most people would not even notice them. Her fingers found microscopic cracks and ledges. Her feet pressed against variations in texture that provided just enough friction to support her weight. She is climbing like a gecko, whispered someone in the back of the room. Geckos do not climb smooth crystal walls, General Vorthik pointed out. No, agreed Admiral Kethrel. They do not. Sarah reached the top of the crystal wall and pulled herself up onto the final ledge. The extraction point was just ahead, a flat area where the pickup ship would land. She had completed the Crucible of Korath in just over 60 hours. She sat down on the edge of the ledge and looked back at the path she had climbed. Far below, she could see other cadets still making their way through the lower sections of the throat. It would take most of them another day or 2 to reach the top. Sarah checked her wrist chronometer and smiled. She had a few hours before the extraction ship arrived. Maybe she could climb back down and help some of the other cadets find better routes through the maze. In the monitoring station, Admiral Kethrel stared at the screens in stunned silence. Around him, officers and technicians were too shocked to speak. The impossible had happened. A human cadet had completed the most difficult survival course in the galaxy in less than 3 days, helped multiple other cadets survive, and looked like she was enjoying herself the entire time. Sir, said Technician Yelenik quietly, what do we do now? Admiral Kethrel did not answer immediately. He was thinking about threat assessments and military capabilities, and the fact that humans came from a planet so dangerous that most alien species considered it uninhabitable. If this was what a single human could do with basic equipment and no special training, what could they do if they really tried? Contact Academy Command, he said finally. Tell them we need to completely revise our understanding of human military potential. And the extraction ship arrived exactly on schedule, 3 days after the Crucible had begun. Sarah heard the engines long before she saw the ship itself. The sound echoed off the crystal formations below, bouncing around the throat of Korath like thunder in a canyon. She stood up and waved as the ship came into view. It was smaller than the transport that had dropped them off, designed for quick pickups rather than carrying large groups. The pilot brought it down carefully on the landing pad, keeping the engines running. Cadet Chun called the crew chief. As the door opened, he was a short, furry alien with large ears and nervous eyes. "You are early." "A little bit," Sarah agreed. She climbed aboard and strapped herself into one of the passenger seats. The crew chief closed the door and signaled the pilot to take off. "How early exactly?" the pilot asked over the intercom. His voice sounded confused. Sarah checked her chronometer. "About 4 days and 10 hours early." The ship shuddered slightly as they lifted off. Through the small window, Sarah could see the crystal formations of the throat shrinking below them. Other cadets were still scattered throughout the maze, tiny figures moving slowly along crystal ledges and through narrow passages. 4 days early, the crew chief repeated slowly. That is not possible." "I think your chronometer might be broken," Sarah suggested helpfully. The crew chief checked his own timepiece, then the ship's navigation computer, then his timepiece again. All systems show the same time. "You completed the Crucible of Korath in 62 hours, and eyes 14 minutes. Sarah shrugged. It was not that difficult once you understood the patterns. The flight back to the academy was quiet. The crew chief spent most of the time staring at Sarah like she was some kind of alien artifact. The pilot kept checking his instruments and muttering to himself in a language that sounded like squeaking mice. When they docked at the academy, Sarah was surprised to see how many people were waiting for her. The landing bay was crowded with officers in fancy uniforms, technicians with recording equipment, and cadets who had heard rumors about the impossible human. Admiral Kethrall stepped forward as Sarah climbed out of the ship. He was tall, even for his species, with 4 arms and ceremonial armor that caught the light from the bay's artificial suns. "Cadet Chun," he said formally, "welcome back to the academy. How are you feeling?" "Good, thank you," Sarah replied. "A little hungry. The emergency rations taste like cardboard." "You are not injured, not exhausted, not suffering from environmental exposure?" Sarah looked down at herself. Her uniform was dirty and torn in a few places. Her gloves were worn through from climbing crystal formations. But she felt fine, just tired and hungry, like after any long hike. "No, sir, I feel okay. Maybe I could use a shower." The Admiral exchanged looks with the other officers. Several of them were whispering to each other in languages Sarah did not recognize. "Cadet Chun, we need to conduct a debriefing. There are some questions about your performance in the Crucible." "Did I do something wrong?" Sarah asked. She had helped other cadets and shared her supplies, but those seemed like the right things to do. "No, not wrong exactly. Just unexpected. Please follow me." The debriefing room was large and formal, with a long table surrounded by chairs designed for different alien body types. Sarah sat at one end, while a dozen officers arranged themselves around the table. Recording devices hung quietly in the corners. "Let us start with basic information," said Admiral Kethrall. "State your name and background for the record." Sarah Chun, age 22, representing Earth in the military exchange program. "I graduated from the Australian Defence Force Academy 6 months ago." "What special training did you receive for?" "The Crucible?" asked General Vorthak. "The same briefing materials everyone else got. Videos, maps, equipment lists." "Before the academy, what military training did you have?" Sarah thought about it. "Standard officer training. Physical fitness, basic survival skills, leadership courses. Nothing too special." "Enhanced genetic modifications?" asked Dr. Melther. "No, sir." "Cybernetic implants?" "No, sir." "Performance-enhancing drugs or treatments?" "No, sir. Just regular human." The officers looked at each other again. One of them, a thin alien with blue skin, leaned forward. Cadet Chun, you completed a course that normally takes 6 to 7 days in less than 3 days. You crossed terrain that our experts considered impassable. You climbed surfaces that should not be climbable. How do you explain this? Sarah was quiet for a moment, trying to think of how to explain it. It really was not that hard. The crystal formations follow geological patterns. If you understand how they were formed, you can predict where the stable sections are. The toxic areas have air currents that create safe passages. The wildlife follows predictable hunting patterns. Where did you learn geological survey techniques? Asked Dr. Melther. I did not learn them. I just looked at the rocks, and they made sense. What about advanced climbing techniques? I learned to climb when I was a kid. My grandfather taught me. Admiral Kethral leaned forward. Tell us about this grandfather. Sarah smiled, thinking of the old man who had taught her so much. Grandpa Joe. He was a park ranger in the Australian outback before he retired. He used to take me camping when I was little. We would go out into the bush for weeks at a time. The bush? The wilderness. Desert areas, mostly. Hot during the day, cold at night. Lots of dangerous animals and poisonous plants. You have to know how to find water, what you can eat, how to read the land. This was recreational activity? General Vorthak's voice was strained. Sure, we called it fun. Grandpa said it was important for kids to learn how to survive in the young. Wild. Most Australian kids go camping with their families. The room was completely silent. Sarah looked around at the alien faces staring at her and wondered if she had said something wrong. Cadet Chun, Admiral Kethral said slowly, you are telling us that you learned survival skills as a child for recreation on a planet that we classify as a death world. Well, Australia is not that dangerous if you know what you are doing, Sarah said. I mean, sure, there are drop bears and huntsman spiders and saltwater crocodiles and box jellyfish, and blue-winged octopus and funnel-web spiders and taipan snakes and stonefish and... She trailed off as she noticed the aliens were all staring at her with expressions of horror. How many of these creatures could kill a human? Asked Dr. Mel Targot. Sarah thought about it. Most of them, I guess. But they usually do not bother you if you leave them alone and you learn to watch out for them. And this is considered normal childhood education on your world? In Australia, yes. Other places are different. Kids in Canada learn about bears and wolves. Kids in Brazil learn about jaguars and poison dart frogs. Kids in Africa learn about lions and elephants and hippos. Sarah paused. Actually, hippos are probably more dangerous than most of this stuff in Australia. They kill more people than crocodiles do. The silence in the room was so complete that Sarah could hear the ventilation system humming in the walls. Commander Yulsef was the first to speak. Admiral, I recommend we contact Earth immediately. We need to reassess our classification of human military capabilities. I concur, said General Vorthak. If this cadet represents average human abilities, we have seriously underestimated their species. But I am not special, Sarah protested. Any Australian kid could have done what I did, probably better. My cousin Jake is way better at tracking than I am, and my friend Maria can free climb surfaces I would need ropes for. The aliens exchanged looks that spoke volumes about their growing panic. Admiral Kethral stood up slowly. Cadet Chun, you are hereby promoted to instructor status. Your first assignment will be to develop new survival training protocols for Academy cadets. Sir, you will also be asked to provide detailed information about typical human survival training. We need to understand the full scope of your species' capabilities. Sarah was confused, but pleased. What kind of training should I develop? The Admiral thought about cadets who panicked at the first sign of difficulty, who required extensive equipment for basic survival, who considered the Crucible of Korath an impossible challenge. "Start with something simple," he said. "Basic wilderness survival. Earth difficulty level 1 out of 10. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of a classroom full of alien cadets who looked absolutely terrified. She had prepared what she considered a very basic survival exercise. A 3-day camping trip in a mild forest environment with temperatures that only varied by 20 degrees, and no, significantly dangerous wildlife. "Before we begin," she said cheerfully, "does anyone have any questions about the equipment list?" Every hand in the room went up as Antari Cadet in the front row raised a cybernetic arm. "Instructor Chun, why do we not get environmental suits?" "You will not need them. The air is breathable and the temperature is comfortable." A Catherian cadet spoke up. "What about predator deterrent weapons?" "There are no major predators in this area, just some small animals like rabbits and squirrels." "Poison detection equipment?" "Nothing poisonous grows there this time of year." "Emergency medical bay?" "Basic first aid kit should be plenty." "Backup extraction team?"